Everything I'm telling you is firsthand and true. And if you're pro-choice, trust me, I understand, because it's exactly the way I felt many years ago. I want you to imagine that you're an obstetrician-gynecologist, and you're a pro-choice obstetrician-gynecologist like I used to be. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 20 weeks pregnant. Her uterus is all the way up to her umbilicus. If you could see her baby, which would be easy on an ultrasound, her baby would be the length of your hand, crown to rump, head to rump, the length of your hand from the tip of your middle finger to your wrist, not counting the arms and legs. She's been feeling her baby kick for the last 2 weeks. But now she's asleep on an operating room table, and you're there to help her with her problem. You walk into that operating room scrubbed and gowned, and to the right is a small table with your instruments. And the first thing you reach for is a 14 French suction catheter. It's about 10 inches long, it's clear plastic. And if you can picture yourself putting this catheter up through the cervix and instruct your circulating nurse to turn on the suction machine. And what you'll see is pale yellow fluid running through the tubing into the machine. This is amniotic fluid that was there to protect the baby. Now, if she were only 12 weeks pregnant or less, a 12-week baby is the width of your hand, or smaller. You could pretty much do the entire abortion with this one instrument. Babies this size don't fit through catheters this size. So you reach down and get a Sofer clamp. So you don't have to imagine I brought one along. It's about 13 inches long, stainless steel. The business end is about 2.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. And when you get a hold of this, look at it. There's rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. A second trimester D&E abortion is a blind procedure. You can't see anything. You have to do the whole thing by feel. So picture yourself again placing this up through the cervix carefully, because the walls are thin and soft and it's easy to perforate. And then grasp anything you can, just blindly. You don't really know what you're grabbing, but just grab a hold of something, squeeze down that clamp and pull. And feel yourself pulling, and I mean hard. And out pouts an arm about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. And reach in again. Grab blindly. Pull hard. Out comes a leg just as big, which you put down on the table next to you. And reach in with this instrument again and again, and tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. You know, a head on a baby that size is about the size of a plum. Again, you can't see it, but you're pretty sure you got it if you got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they'll go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the clamp and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Now you can pull out skull pieces. You have a bad day like I had a lot of times, sometimes a little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations. You just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose. You just made $800 cash in 15 minutes. I graduated from medical school in 1976 in Albany, New York, and I won't punish you by telling me how low my debt was when I did that. And if you asked me at the time how I felt about the abortion issue, I would not have hesitated for a second to tell you that I was pro-choice. This is a decision between a woman, her doctor, and no one, including the baby's father, had anything to say about it. You know, a lot of people identify themselves as pro-life or pro-choice. But for most people, it doesn't really affect their lives directly. But when you're an obstetrician-gynecologist and you say that, now you have to make a personal decision. You have to make a choice. Are you going to be involved in doing abortions or not? Now, I'm in my training. I'm in my residency program, like so many of you in this room are looking forward to getting into. Oh, by the way, you think you're working hard now? Forget it. You'll find out. But I'm there to learn. I'm going to learn how to do hysterectomies and D&Cs and deliveries and cesarean sections and all the stuff that an obstetrician-gynecologist does. And at the same time, I learned how to do abortions. Because, as I said, I was pro-choice. We had a clinic in the hospital at the time. This was the late 70s. Mostly younger people came to that clinic, and if they were 12 to 13 weeks pregnant or less, we would book them for suction D&C abortions. still the standard method of first trimester abortion. I know medication abortions are getting more popular, but back then it was all surgical. And there are still the majority of abortions are suction D&C in the first trimester. And when it was my turn to do them, I'd do 3, 4, 5 in the morning, never thought anything of it. Interestingly enough, we used to do them in the delivery room, if you can believe it, but that's where we did them. If they were more than 12 or 13 weeks pregnant, we would have them come back later. At the time, technology was different, and what we had at the time were called saline abortions. I'm not going to describe them, they're not done anymore. Basically, you draw amniotic fluid out from around the sac and then substitute 20% saline solution, which killed the baby and ultimately ended up in labor. But, you know, so as I said, I won't go into detail on it, but suffice it to say that these young women had to go through labor. And it would take anywhere from 8 to 36 hours for them to abort their usually dead children. But as I said, I was pro-choice. And I don't care what a doctor believes politically, every doctor wants the same thing: happy, healthy patients. I graduated from my residency program in 1980, and it was during my residency training program, actually when I was an intern in 1976, I was working one night and went down to the cafeteria for a break, sat down with a nurse I knew, and an attractive young lady came and sat down next to me, who eventually became my wife about a little over a year later. See, often we give these talks with my wife. She's obviously not here today. But when she's not with me, I get to say things I can't say with her around. We met each other well over 40 years ago, and I still remember the exact first words we spoke to each other. They were, "Are you a doctor?" "Yes, I am." "Write me a prescription for Valium." It's been the same ever since. But we dated, and we found out pretty quickly we were on opposite sides of this issue. And we made the biggest, dumbest mistake you can make in a relationship right off the bat. We decided that, we didn't really decide, we kind of fell into the idea that instead of discussing uncomfortable topics with each other or things where we might be in conflict, we didn't talk about it. And that's the most foolish thing any couple can do. But we got married about a year later, and we were in our late 20s at the time and thinking we were getting old, and wanted to start a family, and found out pretty quickly that we had an infertility problem. I sent my wife to the best infertility expert in town. And any woman who's been through an infertility evaluation knows that it is difficult, painful, embarrassing, extremely hard. And she would come home from those visits, lock herself in the bathroom and cry. Because there were two ironies that were not lost on her. One, here she is married to an obstetrician-gynecologist and she can't get pregnant. And two, here she is trying to get pregnant and her husband's killing babies over at the hospital. But as soon as she thought that, she'd push that thought out. She went through quite a bit, including one surgical procedure when he approached us and said, "I'm going to try one more surgical procedure. It should only take about an hour and a half." But when he walked out of the operating room 4.5 hours later, he came up to me and he said, "Look, I never tell anyone they're not going to have a child, but don't count on it." We were devastated. I mean, we came from big families and we wanted to have a family of our own. So we decided, okay, if these are the cards we've been dealt, we'll adopt a baby, no problem. And anyone who's tried to adopt a baby, we're talking 40 years ago, but it was no easier then than it is now. Anyone who tries to adopt a baby finds out pretty quickly how difficult that whole process is. We called religious agencies, county agencies, state agencies, anybody we could think of. And the best we could do out of months after months of effort, the best we could do was get on a 5-year waiting list to get on the real waiting list. And that's the way it was. It was during that time that I had the first doubts about abortion. They were completely selfish, and I freely admit that. I remember literally, it was an odd dual existence. I'm doing abortions as part of my medical training, yet when I'm going home, I'm trying to find one more phone number to call to find a baby to adopt. And I'm not stupid. I know why it's so difficult to find babies to adopt. And I can see it in my mind perfectly clearly today, being in the delivery room, doing an abortion, and when, looking through the pieces and thinking, gosh, I'm throwing this kid in the garbage. wouldn't at least one of these mothers have her child and allow us to take it home and care for her as our own? And of course, it doesn't work that way. I came up with an idea, which my wife still credits as one of the best ideas I've ever come up with in our entire marriage of 40 years. I said, this is stupid. We're trying to go through regular channels with adoption and we're getting nowhere. This is ridiculous. I know 50 obstetrician-gynecologists on a first-name basis. Let's advertise. Let's tell them all we're looking for a baby, knowing that once in a blue moon, a baby will slip through the cracks and you're going to be available for a private adoption. And that's what we did. And it was several months after that, in August of 1978, I was working in the operating room with one of the attending physicians doing a case, and the circulating nurse came and, tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and she was holding up a piece of paper that said, call Marcia as soon as you're done. Now, Marcia was one of the social service people at the hospital. She was the head of social services at our hospital. And that's all it said, but she is one of the people we had talked to. And I just knew what it was. And sure enough, when I called her at the end of that case, she informed me that there was a 15-year-old girl in labor in the delivery room. She had had no prenatal care. The first time she showed up in a doctor's office was the day before. Now she's in labor. She's healthy. Everything's looking normal. She wants to give her baby up for adoption. Are you interested? Hell yes, I'm interested. I remember staring at the face of that telephone and to call my wife with this news and know I was just 7 digits away from becoming a father. And literally, by the grace of God, we were able to adopt a little girl that we named Heather in August of 1978. This is great. Finally, after all the years, after all the tears, after all the effort, we have a baby. And my wife gets pregnant the very next month. Our son Sean was born in July 1979. The kids were barely 10 months apart. Now, anybody who didn't know that Heather had been adopted would look at the two of them 10 months apart and go, in 10 months? And this is fantastic. I've got the proverbial millionaire's family. I've got a son and a daughter. And any doubts I had about doing abortions evaporated, and I simply went back to business as usual. We left Albany, New York in 1980. We moved to the west coast of Florida for a year, where I started my private practice and found out pretty quickly that a young couple with young kids didn't exactly belong in a retirement community. So we left and went back to upstate New York in Troy, New York, which is right next to Albany, and I set up practice in private practice with a physician that I had trained with. This is in 1981. Now, Bill and I were practiced abortionists. We were not running an abortion clinic. This is a routine OB-GYN office like every woman in this room has probably been to at one time or another. Okay? And abortion was only a small part of our practice. But it is something we both were dedicated to and did. Now, those of us in the abortion industry at the time were looking for a better method of second trimester abortion. Saline abortions were difficult, horrifically difficult for patients, difficult on staff, risky, and expensive with the long hospital stays. We wanted something better. We wanted a method of late-term abortion that was like suction D&C, a method where the patient would go to sleep, and when she woke up, it'd all be over. And that's when suction D&E abortions were being developed. And we saw an opportunity, because there wasn't any other physicians in Albany who were willing to do that procedure. So we trained ourselves to do these late-term second trimester abortions. And we were getting referrals from other physicians as well as their own patients for these. Over the next 4 years, I performed 1,200 abortions. First trimester D&C abortions in the office up to 10 weeks, and anything later in the hospital. Over 100 abortions were the second trimester D&E abortions I described earlier. But hey, life's good. Kids are growing, finally making some money. We can afford a house, we can afford furniture, all the things we didn't have. And everything was just great. Until June 23rd, 1984. June 23rd, 1984 was a Saturday. It was a gorgeous day in Albany. Heather had just graduated from kindergarten 2 weeks before. She was exactly 2 months away from her 6th birthday. Sean was a couple days from his 5th birthday. And I was on call, but it wasn't too busy. Made rounds, and thank God there was nobody in labor that day, so I got to spend the day with my kids and my wife. Took the kids to amusement park, we had dinner together, all the normal things you do, you never think twice about them. And that night, we had friends coming over for cake and coffee, and the kids were playing in the backyard. At 7:25 that night, when we were talking to our friends, we heard the screech of brakes out in front of our house. Kids had gone in the road. Heather had been hit by a car. She was a mess. I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to be able to save people's lives. My wife was an intensive care nurse. This was our living. But it made absolutely no difference. And she died in her arms in the back of an ambulance that night. Now, I know we're mostly young people in this room, but anybody who's had children may think they have some idea of what that would feel like. Unless you've been through this yourself, you have no idea what it feels like. I hope you never find out. What do you do after a disaster? You bury your child, take some time off, and then try to get back into your world. And I don't know how long it was after Heather's death that I did my first D&E abortion, but I showed up at OR number 9 at Albany Medical Center, just like I had over 100 times before. I wasn't thinking this as anything special, it was routine. And obviously I had other things on my mind. And I reached in with a sofa clamp, and I ripped out an arm or a leg, and I just stared at it in the clamp. And I got sick. You know, earlier I talked about stacking up body parts on the side of the table. That's not to gross out the nice people that came to the lecture. When you do an abortion, you have to keep inventory. You have to make sure you get 2 arms, 2 legs, and all the pieces, because if you don't, your patient is going to come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I soldiered on and I finished that abortion. And I know it's difficult for people to accept, but I promised you earlier that everything I'm telling you is firsthand and true. For the first time, after the hundreds of abortions I did as a resident, after the 1,200 abortions I'd done as an attending physician, for the first time I really looked. I really looked at that pile of goo on the side of the table. And all of a sudden, I couldn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see what a great physician I was helping her with a problem, and I didn't even see the $800 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And it occurred to me in that moment that that patient had come to me, figuratively, never literally, but figuratively said, here's $800 cash, kill my son or daughter. And I was the kind of physician who would look her straight in the eye and without any qualm whatsoever say, sure, I'll do that. Needless to say, we were in a crisis. And over the next several months, trying to do my job, my wife and I were both hurting, but we were kind of mourning separately. See, the problem with not talking about important issues in your relationship is when you follow that pattern with one important issue, you start following that pattern with other important issues too. And we'd been drifting apart. And I got into a blame game. All I knew was I was hurting. You see, when those kind of situations come up, you're never wrong in your head. You're always okay. You know, it was a girl's fault for getting pregnant. It was the nurse's fault for scheduling the case. It was the hospital's fault for allowing them. And I was an absolute bear to be around. And as I tell people, you know, I'm full-blooded Sicilian descent. My wife's full-blooded Irish. We have very good discussions at times. And after a couple of months of this, she'd had it up to there. So she had packed a bag, unbeknownst to me, and she was 2 minutes from walking away with our son. But being the person that she is, self-expression is not one of her problems, she decided she was going to have it out, and she did. It's not the girl's fault, it's not the hospital's fault, and it's not the nurse's fault. It's your fault. You stupid idiot, if you're feeling so bad about this, why don't you just quit? That was the icebreaker for the first time in our marriage of almost 6 years at that point, that we actually talked about what was going on. Talked for 2 hours. Thankfully, she didn't walk out the door. The next day, I went to my partners and I told them I would no longer do any late-term second trimester D&E abortions. It was just too painful. They knew what was going on. They were very understanding at first. But I'm very hard-headed. I'm just going to do the little ones, the first trimester abortions we do in the office. And for a few more months, I soldiered on doing those. How many medical students in the room? A lot of them, okay, and other students too. People put you on a pedestal. They think you're some kind of God. Trust me, you're not. You're going to find out real fast that you're not. But people think doctors are so smart. We're no different than anybody else. When you really figure out, here, not here, that killing a baby that big for money is wrong, it took me months to finally figure out it didn't matter if the baby was this big or this big or this big or maybe even this big, it's all the same. And in February of 1985, I'm ashamed to say it's that long, I went back to my partners a second time and I told them I would no longer perform any abortions. I haven't performed an abortion since then and I never will. Stop doing abortions. I look back on it, I understand maybe it wasn't so tough after all. Get involved in the pro-life movement? Not a chance. Everyone in the abortion industry knows, every pro-choicer knows that everybody in the pro-life movement is a kook. They know this. CNN tells me so. They would never lie to me. It was maybe 8 or 9 months after I stopped doing abortions that my wife came home and said that we'd been invited to a pro-life potluck dinner by somebody at our church. And I laughed. You know, it was like, what? Pro-life potluck dinner? Why would I want to go to some stupid dinner with a bunch of kooks? As it turned out, and I had an easy out. It was a Friday evening. We had something else to do. But as it coincidentally turned out, where we were going for the something else, we had to go by the pro-life potluck dinner. There was only one road to get there, and we had to go by it to get where we were going. And I said, what the heck? And I said, you know what, let's just stop at the pro-life potluck dinner. We'll walk in for 10 minutes and we'll get out of there. And that night, the ex-abortionist and his wife walked into a pro-life potluck dinner. And it looked like a scene, those dumb scenes from a movie you've seen more than once where, you know, somebody walks into a bar or a restaurant or somewhere they obviously don't fit in for whatever reason, and the whole place goes dead quiet. Everybody looked up and the whole place went dead quiet. You know, I didn't take an ad out saying I wasn't doing abortions anymore. I just stopped. And a lot of these people didn't know that. And I had no idea these people knew who I was, but they did. And a lot of them didn't know I wasn't doing abortions anymore. We ended up spending an hour and a half at the pro-life potluck dinner. Guess what? Big surprise. These weren't kooks. These people understood the medicine, they understood the law, and they were giving their time voluntarily, sacrificially, to stop what they saw as the worst human rights abuse of our time. We were impressed, and we joined Citizens Concerned for Human Life, a pro-life group in Albany, New York, that we walked in on. I started speaking on a limited basis rather after that, and it kind of culminated early on in November of 1987. Joe and Ann Scheidler, who are friends of mine now, run the Pro-Life Action League out of Chicago. And they had a conference called Meet the Abortion Providers, where they had doctors, nurses, clinic owners who had previously been in the abortion industry and got out. And basically the point of the conference was, tell us what your experiences were and why you quit. And I'd never told, even though I'd been speaking a little bit about it, I'd never told anybody about Heather or why I'd stopped. And I'm literally on the plane going to Chicago for this conference not knowing what I was going to say. And I decided, you know what, I'll tell them why I quit. And it was the first time I told anybody about why I stopped, doing abortions, about Heather's death. So if you understand, that's how I went from one to the other. Human life is sacred. Your life is sacred. And I'm not even saying that in a religious sense. Think for just a moment. Answer the question in your own mind. Is your life valuable? Yes or no? It's amazing how you go to conferences and you ask that question, especially when somebody's on the opposite side, and they'll choke because they know where the question's going. Is your life valuable? Then answer this question. Does the value of your life depend on what I think of you? Does the value of your life depend on who the president of the university, what they think of you? Does the value of your life depend on what your parents think of you? I want to show you a little bit about what's going on these days in a couple of ways. Anybody here, who in the room, student-wise at least, knows the name George Tiller? Anybody know that name? George Tiller was the late-term abortion king of the whole country. He practiced in Kansas. And he was murdered in the back of his church by somebody who claimed to be pro-life, who clearly doesn't know what the word means, and is now serving a life sentence, as he should. But when he died, his group, he wasn't alone, broke up. And most of them ended up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, about 3 hours from my home. And now they run Southwest Women's Options, which is a late-term abortion clinic. It is now the late-term abortion capital of the world, and I do mean that sincerely. Southwest Women's Options operates out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, 220 miles from where I live. And I want you to see, now some of you know the name Live Action. It's a very interesting organization. Lila Rose has got guts. And she would do sting videos on these places. And I want you to see what goes on at Southwest Women's Options. And I would like you to judge what you see and hear as medical professionals.
Dr. Boyd, Southwestern Women's Options. How may I help you?
Hi, I was hoping to schedule an abortion.
All right, so it looks like we can do this for you, but it is going to be a week-long procedure. We have a hotel that we work in conjunction with. They give room rates to our patients, and they also will pick you up at the airport.
Okay.
They will bring you back and forth to all your appointments, and they will take you back to the airport again, and that's all free of charge.
Wow.
And they're called the Plaza Inn.
Plaza Inn?
Mm-hmm.
Morning, Plaza Inn downtown Albuquerque. How may I direct your call?
I just had some questions about discounted rates for patients of Southwestern Women's Options.
$49 plus tax.
They did mention that towards the last few days of my appointments that I would be in labor. So if I go into labor during the night, does the Plaza Inn provide shuttle service to Southwest Women's Options overnight?
No. Actually, you would probably need to, most of those cases, you guys actually transport yourselves, either taxi or you'll call the ambulance, because I don't even think you go to the clinic. I think you'll end up going to the hospital. Once you get there to the Southwest Women's Options, they pretty much give you, like, what's going to happen, the process, and where you would call and so forth if you do happen to go through labor during the night on those last 2 days.
Well, we get is at your 27 weeks. Mm-hmm. It's a different procedure. You thought you were 23 weeks?
Yeah.
It is a different procedure. We induce labor. So you will deliver a stillbirth.
If we can't catch it early enough, which it has happened, if you're feeling pressure, it's moving down or something coming out, the pregnancy coming out, then you'll want to unlock the door to the hotel room, get your cell phone, and just sit on the toilet. You don't have to look at anything. You don't have to clean anything up or nothing. Just be on the phone with us, and and you could stay on the phone with us until the doctor and nurse get there. Okay?
Oh, good. So just go in the toilet if I'm having labor. Okay.
Yeah.
And what if it does come out when I'm on the toilet?
Just, you don't gotta look down. You don't gotta do anything. The doctor and nurse will come take care of it. If you feel like it's too much to see any of it, then do not let yourself look at it. Okay. Okay. If you want to cover yourself, even with like a towel or something.
Okay.
Go ahead.
If you want to make the reservation, just give a call back and Whoever answers the phone, you just let them know you're coming in with South Women's Option. They'll give you the discounted rate.
Quiz time. How far along is she? 27 weeks. How much does this abortion cost? $10,000. $8,000 at 25 and $1,000 for every week after. This is a $10,000 abortion. And for $10,000 of cash, they have a woman laboring alone in a hotel room, no nurse in attendance, no doctor, and they can't afford at $10,000 to have a nurse or a physician with this woman while she labors alone in a hotel room and delivers her dead son or daughter into a toilet. Anybody want to comment on the quality of health care we're witnessing here? This video is part of the congressional record now. I introduced it during a hearing. It was very interesting watching a congressional hearing and how the politics lined up on both sides. Annie, are you a human being?
Yes.
How do I know? It's a scientific definition, right?
Okay. It's a science.
You're an animal with a certain number of human chromosomes and I look like this, right? Annie, are you a person?
Yes.
How do I know?
Because I'm a human being.
Okay, so is there any difference whatsoever between a human being and a person?
No.
Incorrect. What does a person have that human beings don't? See, in law, there are only two things: persons and property. That's it. Everything in law is simple. Law is simple. You are either a person or you're property. There's nothing else. Okay? This is my property. No one would be shocked if I broke it in half or threw it away or gifted it to someone. Okay? What does a person have that a human being might not have? What is the difference? Go ahead.
Rights.
Amen. Rights. That's the difference between a person and a human being. And you all know the time when some human beings were not persons. They were property. Same thing. Okay? So, Annie, when did you acquire your rights?
I would say at conception.
Okay. Anybody have another idea when Annie got her rights? When she was born. Actually is the right answer. So, assuming that Annie was a nice normal vaginal delivery, I have no idea, we'll assume that. So when Annie's head came out, was she a person? Not yet. How about when her chest delivered? She was all the way up to her waist. Was she a person? Nope. How about when her big toe was still in her mother's vagina? Was she still a person? Was she a person at that point? Actually, not yet. Does this discussion seem ridiculous to you? This discussion, almost word for word, occurred in the U.S. Congress between a Republican congressman and Nancy Pelosi, arguing over abortion rights. That's it. And believe me, that's it. That is a legal basis of everything we are talking about. I do like what live action, can I get back to my video? I do like what live action does. They do some really, really good work.
We don't offer any prenatal care.
We don't offer prenatal care at Planned Parenthood.
Planned Parenthood offers abortion, so they don't offer prenatal care.
Prenatal care. These are the kinds of services that folks depend on Planned Parenthood for.
And a president who will fight for prenatal care.
Prenatal care. And that is what we want to focus on. That is what is so vital.
Thank you for calling Planned Parenthood. My name is how can I assist you today?
Hi, I was hoping to make an appointment for prenatal care.
For what type of service?
Prenatal care, pregnancy care.
We don't have prenatal care here. Planned Parenthood offers abortion, so they don't offer prenatal care.
Okay, just abortions.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no, we wouldn't provide any type of prenatal services here at Planned Parenthood.
We're not a prenatal care provider. No Planned Parenthood does prenatal care.
We don't offer prenatal care at Planned Parenthood. We specialize in abortions. You know, that's what our ultrasounds are for, to see how far along the patient is.
Planned Parenthood, we do birth control, things like that, termination. We check for STI, but we don't do prenatal.
We tell you you're pregnant, and we also let Planned Parenthood do the abortions.
Okay.
So we don't do any prenatal services.
No
here.
prenatal.
No, we don't do prenatal services. I mean, it's called Planned Parenthood. I know it's kind of deceiving.
Do you have OB-GYNs here?
We do not, no.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which is a deceptive name, right? I think the same thing.
Or, if you were looking at termination options, we can do that as well.
Did you know that Planned Parenthood can take care of all your reproductive health needs? Whether it's an annual exam, pregnancy testing and counseling, prenatal care, we are here for you with high-quality, low-cost services.
Thank you for holding. This is... How can I help you?
Hi. I was wondering if you guys offer prenatal care.
No, we don't. Not at the moment. Neither our Hampton or Richmond office does.
We don't offer any prenatal care.
Is there any other clinic you can refer me to?
I don't know of anything. I would look around on the internet.
You can try CareNet. I think they do prenatal care.
CareNet?
It's the first building on the strip here.
We only offer family planning services and abortion services.
Not at all at Planned Parenthood.
Okay, so not at any Planned Parenthood. They don't have prenatal
Correct.
care.
No, see, we don't see pregnant women as a way of giving prenatal care.
Okay.
We see pregnant women, if they are considering other options.
Like what other options? Like what do you see the doctor for?
At this location?
Yes.
So at this location, you guys do medication abortion?
Medication abortion.
What pregnancy services do you offer?
We only offer termination services.
We actually don't offer prenatal services. We're not licensed to do so in Oregon or Washington.
Do any of the Planned Parenthoods?
No, we do not offer any prenatal care.
This video just came out a couple of months ago, and as a result of that, Planned Parenthood pulled all references to prenatal care from their website. There's another thing you always hear from Planned Parenthood, and I thought they had a great little explanation of that as well. Oh, you guys controlling it again? Number 3 then.
America's largest abortion chain, Planned Parenthood, claims over and over and over again that abortion is only 3% of the services that they offer.
That's your self-reported abortion statistic.
3% of all the procedures we provide.
It's in their annual report. It's on their website. And their supporters say it all the time.
And abortions only comprise 3% of Planned Parenthood's health services.
Abortion services only account for about 3%.
Because only 3% of what Planned Parenthood does is abortions.
3% of patients visit Planned Parenthood for a safe and legal abortion.
Here's why that statistic is completely bogus, and why the senior editor of the online magazine Slate said that the 3% stat was the, quote, most meaningless abortion statistic ever, and why the Washington Post fact checker gave Planned Parenthood's 3% statistic 3 Pinocchios, marking it as, quote, very misleading. Let's look at the numbers. According to their own annual report, Planned Parenthood commits over 300,000 abortions per year. Last year alone, they did 323,999 abortions, which averages to 887 abortions per day, 37 abortions per hour, 1 abortion every 97 seconds. Again, Planned Parenthood commits 1 abortion every 97 seconds. But how much of what Planned Parenthood does is abortion? Well, let's divide the number of abortions they do in a year by the number of patients they see in a year. 323,999 abortions for 2.5 million patients means that 1 in 8 patients who walk into Planned Parenthood will undergo an abortion. Not 1 in 33, Elizabeth Warren, 1 in 8. It's easy to see where Planned Parenthood's priorities are. They commit 160 abortions for every 1 adoption referral. Though Planned Parenthood constantly talks about their breast exams and Pap tests, they only do less than 1% of the nation's Pap tests and 1.8% of the nation's breast exams, while they do 30.6%, a third of the nation's abortions. But that's a public relations problem. So Planned Parenthood came up with a creative way to make their big business, abortion, look very small. To get the 3% figure, Planned Parenthood divides abortions by the number of so-called services, which they define as a discrete clinical interaction. and they count all these services equally, regardless of the cost, time, or effort it takes to render that service. So an entire abortion procedure, which can cost from $390 to $1,500, is counted the same as a pregnancy test, which a girl could get at a pharmacy for $10. In this way, Planned Parenthood is able to count 9.4 million services. Divide 323,999 abortions by 9.4 million services, and they get 3%. It's easy to see why this math is completely ridiculous. Say a woman goes to Planned Parenthood to get an abortion. She gets her pregnancy test, the abortion procedure, an STI test, and some contraceptives. In one visit, she gets 4 services, one of which is the actual abortion. So Planned Parenthood would say that abortion was only 25% of what they did for that woman, who came into the clinic only for an abortion. Well, by this math, even if 100% of Planned Parenthood patients got an abortion, they would still say abortion is only 25% of their services. Such distorted calculations could be used to obscure the purpose of any business. It would be like the NFL saying that because they sold 5 million hot dogs in a season and there were only 256 games, football is only 0.005% of what they do. Or it'd be like a steakhouse saying, actually, steak is only a very small percentage of what we serve because we also serve salad, mashed potatoes, french fries, beer, wine, soda, water, butter, salt, pepper, ketchup, toothpicks, and breath mints. We'd say, yeah, right, you're a steakhouse. Just like Planned Parenthood is an abortion corporation.
Where's the country going in terms of physician rights? You know, you as a physician will have, or any kind of healthcare professional, you have your own choices to make and you have your own rights as well. Up to now, generally, conscience has been respected in the medical community. If you don't want to do an abortion, you don't have to do an abortion. In fact, there's nothing more pro-choice than that. That's the whole argument. If you don't want to have an abortion, don't have one. If you don't want to do an abortion, don't do that. But that's changing, or there was an attempt made to change it. Under Obamacare, in June of last year, a new regulation was passed, very quietly, that I, as an obstetrician-gynecologist, or frankly any healthcare provider, but mainly me as a gynecologist, if a woman comes into my office and requests an abortion and wants me to do the abortion and I say no, I can be personally, not against my malpractice, personally sued for sex discrimination. And this applies to several areas. There's a real case that occurred in California. A woman gynecologist who does infertility work had a couple, a same-sex couple, come into her office requesting an IVF procedure for their own, to create a child. The physician explained to them that under her own personal code and religious beliefs, that she restricted IVF procedures to married couples only, and this couple was not married. But I understand that you want to have this done. I have no problem. My partner right in the next room will be happy to take care of you. The couple looked at her and said, no, we want you. Then sued her and won in court. Okay, so conscience regulations were in serious jeopardy prior to this election. Is termination of pregnancy taught in residency programs? The answer is, in many residency programs it is. The ACGME, the Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education, has a rule on the books and has been on the books since 1996 requiring residency programs in obstetrics and gynecology to provide abortion training. On the other hand, it's not, if you're in violation of that one tenet, it is not going to be enough to get your program unaccredited. So it's a bit of a gray area. The majority of obstetrics and gynecology residencies do train abortions. Some of them have an opt-out provision. If you don't want to be involved, you just simply say you don't want to be involved. Some have an opt-in. If you want abortion training, just tell us and we'll make sure you get it. And some don't have anything at all. So it's a bit of a gray area right now on that one.
I'm just wondering exactly, what logic brought you to the point that you said a full-term baby is the same as a zygote?
Is a 1-year-old the same as you?
I don't know. Life-wise?
You don't know?
Mm-hmm. So in what context?
You're both human beings.
Sure.
So how does a 1-year-old, differ from you? Is a zygote a human being, is what you're asking?
Yeah,
okay.
I guess so.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so not the answer, the logic.
The logic. The logic is biologic.
So as I said, I'm not
It
going
is, okay, no, it's a fair question. It's a very fair question. My logic is based on science.
Okay. Can you elaborate?
It couldn't be anything else. If the zygote is not human, what is it?
I don't know.
Okay? You don't know. I do.
Okay.
That's a human being.
All right.
You know, in my practice, if you ever do obstetrics and gynecology, you're going to see a lot of people that undergo spontaneous miscarriage. It's really common. And these people are devastated much of the time. And you know what I would do, and I would do this with every single patient, because they start to blame themselves. I would take a piece of paper, step my pen onto that, and hold it up and say, you know what? That's, once upon a time, that was you. And now it's all here, and it all works. It's a miracle. And I'm not insulting anybody's religion. But it's a miracle. It makes the parting of the Red Sea look like a parlor trick. It really does. That is, once upon a time, that was you. Whether you want to believe it or not, that's all you were. But it was still you.
I have another question with regard to infertility and abortion. Can you speak a little bit to that issue? Is there a significant incidence of infertility associated with abortion?
There are numerous papers out there that make a case that abortion may ultimately increase the risk of fertility through cervical incompetence. It can happen from forcible stretching of the cervix. Infections that can occur after abortion procedures. Increased risk of preterm birth following abortion procedures. There's a lot of data on all of those things out there. And you know, you'll also find data that says the opposite. I mean, the whole argument about abortion and breast cancer is like that. There are hundreds of papers that show an association between abortion and breast cancer. And there's a science behind it as to that makes sense in terms of why that is. But ACOG, you know, relies on 2 studies and says there's no connection, that's it. Problem settled. Anybody who says otherwise is an idiot. And that's ACOG. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists is exactly why I resigned from ACOG over 15 years ago. And you know, it's interesting because even in ACOG, and I respect a lot of what ACOG does, most of what they do is great. They are the leaders in this profession. But only 14% of ACOG physicians will even do an abortion. 14%. And yet they get, and I have been opposite the table of them in congressional hearings. They'll sit there, we represent 175 obstetrician gynecologists. They have never once, not once, have they polled their membership on this issue. Because if they did, they know exactly what they would hear. And so ACOG, I'm not a big fan. In my computer on my email account, I have an email exchange between me and Dr. Hale, who was their executive director when I resigned from ACOG. It's very instructive. We are a pro-choice organization. We are not pro-abortion, although I appreciate, Dr. Levatino, that you probably don't see a difference. And the answer is, you're right, Dr. Hale, I don't. Go ahead.
So, I don't know if you've seen the Hush documentary, or, but I just watched that. And
Remind me which one that is. I've seen so many I've lost track.
So it's a documentary that goes through the studies of breast cancer.
I did see Hush, and I thought it was excellent.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about the validity of these things, because I've talked to a couple of general surgeons that do a lot with breast cancer, and they have no.
It's not taught.
It's not taught.
It's being. Trust me, it's being taught in my medical school, but it's not being taught. The science is simple. The scientific, or the explanation on the side that thinks that there is an increase is, I think, compelling. Every woman, every single healthcare practitioner knows that you can lower the risk of breast cancer substantially by doing what? What? Go through a full-term pregnancy. This has been known for hundreds of years. How would you further reduce the risk of breast cancer? Breastfeed. Okay? The numbers plummet. This has been known for hundreds of years. And it's only now that we understand a little better about it. Breast tissue comes in 4 varieties. Breast tissue lobules, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. A woman gets pregnant. What's her first complaint? My breasts hurt. Why? The breast tissue is proliferating like mad under the influence of high levels of estrogen and progesterone, but mostly estrogen dominant. They proliferate. This is normal. At 32 weeks, and very precisely, and these are type 1 and type 2 lobules, estrogen-stimulated, estrogen-proliferated breast lobules, and estrogen is a carcinogen. It is now classified that by the FDA. Okay? What happens? What makes a difference? At 32 weeks, and very precisely at 32 weeks, those type 1 and type 2 lobules convert to type 3 and 4 under the influence of now dominant progesterone, and it's cancer resistant. And it happens very precisely. There are dozens of studies out there that show that if a pregnancy ends prior to 32 weeks for any reason, preterm delivery, toxemia, cardiac disease, I don't care. If the pregnancy ends very precisely before 32 weeks, that woman ends up with all those type 1 and type 2 proliferated lobules just sitting there that have never been matured through the natural process. And then the longer she goes, until she does go through a pregnancy that achieves at least 32 weeks of gestation, the higher her cancer risk. There's dozens of studies that show this. And yet ACOG, in its nonpartisan, non-political wisdom, oh, this bullshit. There's no evidence for that. Boom, just like that. And that movie is excellent because they sit there and they talk to physicians. You remember the physician? There is no association. There is no association. He was a wind-up. That's all he kept saying. And then they just keep presenting the evidence to him and he just keeps on ignoring it. There isn't just smoke, there's fire here. But it's not politically correct. And that is very frustrating to me as a physician. Everybody wants less breast cancer, for gosh sakes. Can't we at least agree on the data? But it's political. And if you think there's no politics in medical research, think again. Not when it comes to this subject. New England Journal of Medicine. Can you name a more prestigious medical journal? And to be the lead article in the New England Journal of Medicine, man, you just won the Nobel Prize practically. And I'll never forget, I laughed when I got my copy years ago and read a study about the incidence of complications with abortion. This is how many abortions are legally recorded. This is how many complications we know about. The complication rate is therefore 0.224%. End of paper. That's it? A high school student could have put that together, and yet it's the lead article in the New England Journal of Medicine? What does that tell you? It's become impossible to separate the politics from the medicine. Every scientist, every health professional of any character or morality at all, you follow the data wherever it goes. That's it. But not in this area. Too often not in this area. The last practice I worked in before I moved to New Mexico was very interesting. It was a husband and wife team. She did general gynecology, so did I. We were on the first floor. He did infertility. He was on the second floor. Okay, and he was training residents. And we used to all eat lunch together. In fact, we were talking about this abortion breast cancer link with the resident. You know, I said, hey, here are the papers. You're a doctor. You figure it out. You know, here's the data. Read it. You know, and it was interesting. One of the embryologists up in there who worked in the lab, I didn't work with the people up there. All I knew that she was 26 years old and she'd been married 6 months ago and her name was Carol. That's all I knew about her. She showed up in my office that evening and said, geez, I found that discussion, she's a scientist, I found that discussion interesting. Could I have copies of those papers? Yeah, sure, no problem. And we got talking about the subject. It doesn't take too long. Generally, again, language. You know, he who controls the language controls thinking, and don't think everybody doesn't know that. Those anti-choice, they're not pro-life. Just like I'm pro-choice, not pro-abortion. I mean, it goes crazy with that stuff. But anyway, it's not hard to figure out where somebody falls, even in casual conversation. You've had the experience. And I could kind of tell where she was going with her as we were discussing it. And we're just two people discussing this. So I looked at her and I said, they said, all I knew about her was name Carol, 26 years old, married 6 months ago, okay? And I asked her a question, a basic question. I said, well, what do you think of the issue? And she gave a typical kind of mushy pro-choice answer. You know, it's, well, I feel kind of bad about it at times, but after all, it's just a choice. I mean, that's what they would call a moral relativism type argument. No problem with that. That's what she thought. And I just had a flash in my head, and so I asked her a second question. I said, okay, so what you're telling me is in that your universe, It would be perfectly okay if your husband cheated on you, because after all, it's just a choice. Whoa, she flipped in 1/10 of a second. That would be wrong in that tone of voice. She went from moral relativism to absolute right or wrong in a blink of an eye. Why would it be wrong? Because he promised. Is it wrong because he promised? Or is it just wrong because it's wrong? It's wrong because it's wrong. Okay, interesting. What do you think of sex selection abortion? Somebody ends up with a girl, but they really want a boy. That's not right. Okay, chalk that off. What do you think of, and we asked specifically about the thing we talked about, what do you think about a woman who comes in, asks for abortion, in fact, multiple abortions, and I can tell you another story about that, who never does, didn't even lift a finger to contracept in any way? That's wrong. But by the time we were done with 7 or 8 more questions, she's the one who looked at me and said, I guess I'm more pro-life than I thought. Yeah, maybe you are. You know, it's disheartening. It's crushing as a physician, even a pro-choice physician. When I had, for instance, my 17-year-old patient came in for her 5th abortion. Okay, this girl needs a serious hobby. Okay, she needs help. 5? Seriously? And that's the whole thing we're talking about. Yes, education, but please tell me how you turn education into action. Please. I wish we knew. And we all want that. We all want that. Did I wear you out? Thank you all very much.